Nettles clear deposits in the body. Spinach lays down deposits in the body. So if you've got arthritis and inflammatory problems such as that, then really spinach is not the thing you should be consuming, but nettles certainly are.
And you actually have proper consultations that last kind of an hour or so, whereas when you go and see a GP now, you're lucky if you get 10 minutes.
So the other thing I love about plantain is if you get bitten or stung by anything, even a nasty horsefly, if you roll up the leaf of the plantain, some people chew it, get saliva involved, doesn't matter which you do, and then you rub it onto the bite or the sting, it stops it tracing through the blood.
Welcome to The Wellness Way with me, Philly J. Lay, a layperson's guide to your natural health systems, your very own NHS.
Hello, lovely people, and welcome to another episode of The Wellness Way. And I always say this, but I'm so excited today. My next guest is an amazing, amazing registered herbalist, Barbara Wilkinson. She is also a trustee for the Herb Society UK, and I'd never heard of the Herb Society UK. And when I started delving into this woman, I discovered so much information that I just didn't know. This has just been a joy of a journey researching this podcast. So before we go any further, let me introduce to you the wonderful Barbara Wilkinson. Barbara, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you very much. Nice to be invited. Wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
First of all, please tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a third generation herbalist, but you didn't train till you were 50. So just give us a brief outline on why it took so long, love.
I know. Well, life gets in the way, doesn't it? But I was brought up by a mother who was a herbalist, not trained, but used to help people. And our household was all about herbs, really. I wasn't a child that went to the doctor. I wasn't a child that was vaccinated. So my upbringing was different to my peers, which you don't realize until you get a little bit older. And then, when you start mixing and mingling with other people, you think, goodness, that's strange what they're going to do compared to what we do. My grandfather, who sadly I didn't know on my mother's side, was also a herbalist. So my mother got it from handed down in the family. And further back than that, I really don't know. But I mean, that's how life used to be. Knowledge was handed down and passed on through families.
Absolutely.
I'm one of two sisters. I'm the younger. And funnily enough, when we go to those other generations, it was always the youngest that took up whatever. I didn't realize that until after I'd trained. But yes, my interest started out mainly in food, and I really went into food industry and looking at all that aspect, and very quickly was disillusioned with what I thought would have been super was absolutely shocking, and I didn't want to be part of it. So after my training, I didn't really go down that route very much. I was always interested in health, nutrition, lifestyle, all other aspects really connected with food. So yeah, got married, had a couple of children, worked doing all sorts of things, but it wasn't until, as you say, much later, I met somebody, an elderly registered herbalist, actually through my son, who wanted somebody else's opinion other than just mum's. And we went along, and it was like, going home. It was just wonderful. And she was only 15 minutes away, getting on in years, and invited me immediately to a herbal conference, which she used to hold twice a year with people from all over the world and do amazing things and teach herbal medicine students. So naturally, I felt very at home and said, well, can I help you?
Fantastic.
And when I met the students, I thought, my goodness, you can actually train to do this. So yeah, I was 50 when I started my formal training.
So tell us about the Herb Society, because I didn't know about the Herb Society UK.
You hadn't heard about it?
I hadn't, no.
Wow. And it's 96 years old this year, which is just incredible.
God.
And ever since I've been a trustee, I was invited to be a trustee because of my background, and I got to be out and about quite a lot and quite vocal about the world of herbs and everything connected with it. So I got picked up pretty quickly and asked to be advisory to the Herb Society, and that's how I came on board as a trustee. I've enjoyed it and continue to do. And the amazing thing is that it's mainly volunteers that help to support it and run the whole system in the background with a few support staff. And it came out of a very interesting time in our history, really, of what was going on in the UK, that the government were wanting to ban the use of herbs and take them off the shelves and close the herb shops that were in every town and stop herbalists from working. And one woman who was a herbalist was called Hilda Lay, and she was ever so keen to ensure that the future of herbs remained. And as a result, she went to the government who were bringing this act in, and she lobbied the government, and she got lots of colleagues and friends together, and they managed to get the act overturned in so much that it was amended rather than overturned, so that as long as people consulted herbalists, registered herbalists, just like consulting the doctor, then you could still be seen and have a choice in your healthcare.
Oh, that's kind of reminiscent of what we're going through now.
Very much so, because not many people realized as time went on, because the pharmaceutical industry was growing hugely around this time, of course, and that was probably why they didn't want herbalists and herbs to be accessible to people like they've been for centuries. So what actually happened was that act came in with that clarity that if you wanted to be treated with herbs and by a herbalist, you had to work through consultations, just like you would going for a consultation with a doctor or somebody like that. And actually that's remained the same today. That is how registered medical herbalists still work. We don't just see people on the phone or, in the shops, I've got this wrong with me, what can you say that I take? That's not how we work. We are required by law to work through consultations. And we're also required by law as registered herbalists to continue with our professional development so that we are continually lifelong learners, and so that we attend so many things a year, and so that we can bring things to our practice to benefit the practice and benefit ourselves in our professional career. And not a lot of people seem to know that. They're not aware that we're just the same as other doctors and consultants, etc., and that we have to meet those requirements. And that's very different than anybody else.
That's fascinating. And also you talk about the fact that you have a consultation, and you actually have proper consultations that last kind of an hour or so. Whereas when you go and see a GP now, you're lucky if you get 10 minutes. And, there is you're looking at the whole picture, the whole body, which a lot of these, and I use the term lightly, alternative systems do, but we didn't alter nature.
No, alternative's the right choice of words there, actually, Philly, because in my world, the original medicine is herbal medicine. Ever since all life on Earth evolved, we've always worked with plants, and we've always used our plants as our medicine, our food, our shelter. It's been absolutely everything. So herbal medicine is actually the original medicine on Earth, on this planet. And the alternative and complementary is not the right term at all for herbal medicine. That's the modern stuff. That's the choice that some other people choose to take. But the original medicine is herbal medicine, has been throughout the world.
Absolutely. And I want to take a massive, deep dive now into the history of it, going back a few hundred years. So where should we start? Because, a lot of people, don't realize exactly how powerful these systems were and how they've been persecuted. And, you and I both would have been burnt at a stake 300 years ago.
Yes.
So where should we start?
Okay, well, there's a lot of history.
Parkinson, or before that?
Well, if you go back even further, I mean, the Greeks and the Romans and every civilization on Earth had its gardens and its people with knowledge and skill. And like at apothecary gardens, they were there to teach and to get the medicine from. And so all around the world, every civilization has always had its places, whether they be the forests, the gardens, whatever they may be. They've always had the places to learn, to teach, and to get work with the medicines. And then there was a very interesting period of time, and you mentioned Parkinson, because around the time that he was operating and working and publishing his books, there was a few other well-known herbalists, especially in the UK. And so you've leapt forward a long way there, maybe in the 1500s and the 1600s, when really Western herbal medicine was really at its zenith, and people were wanting the books and the information and the knowledge. And a number of people, you've got John Gerard, you've got John Parkinson. There's an awful lot of Johns in the herbal world.
I think there were just a lot of Johns in those times.
I think there were.
There were a lot of Johns.
Yes, there were. It's a very common name. And then, of course, you got Nicholas Culpeper. And interestingly, the chap that you mentioned, Parkinson, he was actually the herbalist to James I. And he had a large plot of land in London and a garden. And he fell out of favour, really, when the king passed away and things changed. But he was very involved. He was a botanist and a gardener and a herbalist. And he wrote his book. And around the similar sort of time, you had, as I say, John Gerard, who also, although born in Cheshire, went off to London to find his fame and fortune, like they all did, and some people still think to do today. And then there was Culpeper, Nicholas Culpeper. And the big difference with Culpeper was that he wanted to translate the text that had already been written, and he wanted to make herbal medicine available to everybody in the public domain. He didn't want herbal medicine just for the rich, like the king and the people who can afford to pay the apothecaries. He wanted people to be able to have their own materia medica, their own book in their own family household, so that they could refer to it and they could use it. So it needed translating from a lot of these Latin volumes. It needed translating into English, and Culpeper was one of the main people that did that. So he produced this marvelous book that sold an awful lot, but he didn't actually make a lot of money, and he didn't live a very long life either. And sadly, because in his book, he was an astrologer as well as a botanist and a herbalist. And because of his links with the astrology and relating the plants to planets, people didn't like that. Some people anyway, the scientists and the people of the medical side of things didn't like that. So they very much called him a quack, and they were dreadful to him, which I would imagine helped shorten his life, sadly.
Yeah.
But the people that he helped, of course, he was very famous, he was very well known, and he predominantly helped them that couldn't afford to pay for the doctors and the people of that sort. So he was very much the people's doctor, if you like, and his books were very much that as well. And his book has continued in print still to this day. And the astrological links are actually fascinating to many of us who also have an interest in that area and can relate to it. And that's when you get onto things like energetics of plants and other aspects of plants that many of us are interested in.
Absolutely. Everything is energy, and, every plant has its own energy and works. That's why homeopathy works. I mean, I know homeopathy isn't just plants, but that is absolutely why herbalism works, in my humble opinion. Now, I just want to put this into some kind of context of the time in history. So Culpeper was born, I believe, in 1616, which I think was the same year as Will Shakespeare.
Yes. Yes, around the same time, definitely.
Yeah, and we're also looking at, the James I Bible. So that people were quite big on translating out of the Latin, bringing it into, a language that everybody could understand. And I know that when Shakespeare wrote his plays, well, we don't know if Shakespeare wrote them or not, but the plays that are accredited to Shakespeare, he never spelt the same word twice. And so they kind of just made it up as they went along, the spelling, the writing part. How did he actually manage to translate? Talk us through the process that he would have gone through to get that into English.
Culpeper, you mean by that?
Yeah.
Well, he must have been quite an academic person, really, to be able to do that. But more than anything, he would have known his plants. He would have known himself what he was talking about. So a lot of it wouldn't have been plagiarism, which many of the others were accused of, but it would have been a compilation of researching the other books, looking at them. But he was a man who actually knew the plants and knew the virtues of them. And that's one of the things we herbalists like to talk about, not the uses, but the virtues of plants. And that's when you really get to know them in depth, and because you work with them, you're with them, and you get a better understanding of them. So being able to translate and interpret, a lot of it would have been personal, his personal interpretation and the way that he found the plants, not just what others have said about it.
So I'm going to ask you a really simple question here. What is a herb?
Well, the dictionary definition is a strange one, because actually all plants are herbs. That's how we see all life on this planet. Every plant, from every blade of grass that you may stand on, every daisy in your lawn, right through to everything that's growing in your garden, in your wild spaces, your fields, your forests, your woodlands, all the trees, everything. It's just our lack of knowledge that we don't know perhaps what they have available to us, what their virtues are. And so it's just ignorance in many ways. That's why we're lifelong learners.
Absolutely. I think that it was quite recently that I learned that a daisy, you mentioned a daisy there, has similar benefits to arnica.
Yeah, it's our common arnica. They're different plants, but they're still part of the daisy family. But the marvelous thing is they have exactly the same properties, and we have them here in the UK. We're in Western culture, and we just take them for granted, which sadly is what has happened over the years in the UK, because things are very commonplace and they're there, we're seeing them every day. We've started to take them for granted because the knowledge isn't passed on, the knowledge isn't handed down, it isn't pointed out to us as it used to be going back generations. However, in many fields and areas, I don't just mean fields as in meadows, but in a lot of places, there's an awful lot of people like me who point things out to people all the time, because this knowledge needs to be shared.
It does. And so with that knowledge being shared, you do this great work with the Trust. I want to talk a little bit more about the fact you mentioned earlier that, you know, this wonderful woman lobbied, got it overturned. But there is a political aspect behind this, because there was a lot going on then with the end of the war, World War I. And could you just, you know, and for a woman to be able to do this.
I know she was quite a mover and shaker of her time. I mean, she was involved during the war. She was a self-taught herbalist, actually. She was in a very fortunate position of coming from a family background with a bit of money behind her. And she was planning to be a doctor, actually, but it was because she fell in love and had 2 children that stepped in the way of persisting with her career. But because she learned about all medicine coming from plants, that was her main interest, and that's where she put her focus, and that's where she taught herself so much knowledge and information. And she actually helped people. She used to consult with people, and she went on even to open the Culpeper shop. So that name again, she used it as a brand, and she started in Baker Street in London. And that was the very first one. And it was so that she could be available to help people that just could walk in off the street and book an appointment. She had to have this consultation. And that's how she was working after that act got amended. And for many years up to her death, the Culpeper shops were hers, and she opened in Bath and Bristol and various places, mainly in the south, not that many in the north. But after she died, her family sold them off, as with her library and many other things. But in her lifetime, she did miraculous things. She was very, very concerned about the injured men and women coming back from the First World War, for example, as many people were. Where were they going to live? How were they going to be looked after? And she got together with a lot of very influential and very famous, wealthy people, more than famous, of the time. And they managed to come up with an idea, or rather Hilda did. They got a plot of land in Lancaster from Mr. Story, and they decided they would build a village, not just a few houses, but a village for people returning from the First World War, and to look after them, because many of them were badly injured, would probably never work again. What we now call post-traumatic stress. We didn't have names for it back in the day, and very few people talked about it. But Hilda came up with a super idea of the golden ballot. So that's a bit like we've seen in the films. And in actual fact, it was the start of the National Lottery. But you know what? She raised over £20,000, and she had some houses built. And they were doing really well. And the government came up and said, you know what, that's an illegal act. We're going to put you in prison.
Why?
Well, because it was an illegal act, you can't raise money like that. In other words, it's never been done before, and they didn't like it. And they thought, oh, this is dodgy. So they threatened her with imprisonment. Fortunately, her friends and colleagues rallied around her, and that didn't happen. But boy, was she annoyed. So much so that she did it again. And she raised even more money. And they had a chapel and a school built, and each home had its own garden, which was like a little mini allotment so they could grow their own. And I was very fortunate as trustee for the Herb Society to be invited to the centenary just a few years ago. So on the visit to the village, I was so thrilled to see that they'd stopped using chemicals in the front gardens and places and by the side of the road where the grass verges were. And they were apologizing for the weeds that were growing. And I said, these are the very plants that saved the people's lives during the war, because these are the very plants that we had to teach the children how to forage and pack and send to the war hospitals. So these are life-saving plants that you are now allowing to live again in the village where they belong, like everywhere else. And the streets of the village are lined with lime trees. And what do we use in herbal medicine for post-traumatic stress disorder? Lime flower. Yes, very, very important. With many things in our toolkit, but the fragrance alone has an effect on the limbic system of the brain. So even if you're not ingesting herbs sometimes, it's the appearance, it's the fragrance, it's other aspects that will affect you.
And also breathing in your gut biome, just the smell of just getting that into your gut and your lungs is so powerful.
Absolutely. And they're always covered in bees and the pollinators. So it's just wonderful to see nature at its best. Yeah.
Perfect. And you mentioned weeds there, and a weed is a plant in the wrong place. So can you just tell us some of the weeds? And I've done posts about this on my social media, actually, because I find it quite extraordinary that if you go into a garden centre and they're selling those toxic roundups and chemicals to eradicate weeds,
the scary stuff, yes,
the scary stuff, most of that packaging has two of the most powerful plants, I think, on the planet. On the front of them, they have the stinging nettle and the dandelion, both of which are massive hitters for your health. So are there any other plants that they would have been sending out for the war effort? What was
it's funny you mentioned dandelion, because you can probably see over my shoulder I have a poster of dandelion in all its botanical state. Absolute beautiful plant. It's wonderful, a true lifesaver. One of the main lifesavers during the war, certainly during all the wars, has been yarrow, the common yarrow, Achillea. And it's growing throughout the summer months, and we use both the flowering heads, which the pollinators adore, and we also use the ferny types of leaves as well. And these are the very plants. Yarrow was one of the main ones the children and the women, if they were still at home, would have been taught how to forage and to package and to then be sent off to the war hospitals. And the reason being, yarrow is a styptic. It actually stops you from hemorrhaging. So it stops blood loss, and very quickly. So you can imagine amputations, operations going on, all sorts of things. They used to actually pack the whole of the wound just with the herb. Didn't actually have to convert it into anything, but use the whole plant material. Heads, leaves and everything would be packed into an open wound that was bleeding, and it would stop it bleeding. So yarrow has saved thousands of lives.
Wow.
Worldwide, because it grows in so many countries. And of course, it goes back to, it's got the name of Achilles and the Achilles tendon and the arrow in the ankle, and how he was taught to look after his best person during the wars and how to stop him bleeding to death as well. So there's Greek mythology, there's all sorts of folklore and mythology with plants, but a lot of it is based on truth as to what actually happened in history. So going back centuries, yarrow has always been used, and hopefully always will be. It's one I'd hate to be without. It has to be in my dispensary.
I wish I'd had it a few weeks ago. I had an accident on a dog toy and fell down the stairs and cracked my head over. And the only thing I had handy was, which is a great thing in the medicine kit, is colloidal silver with aloe vera. So I just packed it with that and vitamin E. But I didn't have any yarrow. But it is one of those amazing, amazing plants, but most people don't know about that.
No, it's growing in the street. It's growing at the side of the road, and people walk past it and just think, oh, that term that you use, weed. I mean, that's not a very nice term at all. Everything's a herb.
It is.
It's all here for a purpose. And for example, it's not just to stop us bleeding and women having problems with periods or childbirth or menopause or anything like that. It's for all ages, all sexes, all cultures, and it's used around the world. And of course, it's a huge pollinator plant. It's so important for the pollinators. So we use the true yarrow. We don't use all the cultivars, of which there are hundreds in the garden centres, but we use that one that people would call common, which I like to say generous.
Oh, how lovely. I love that. Generous yarrow. I'm going to come back to the dandelion because it is one of my favorite plants, and I couldn't have you on without talking to you about it. For me, I eat the whole part of the dandelion, but I have dandelion root in my tea every single day of the year. The thing I love about it most is that when you look at the head, it's this lovely yellow round head that signifies the sun. And then you look at the seed ball and it signifies the moon. And then you blow it and it signifies the stars. And it has so many benefits, not just for us, but for the soil, because it has these incredibly long roots that bring up the nutrients. And then when the leaves wither and die, they're replenishing the soil with the nutrients that come from deep within the ground, because I think we all know and accept now that we've basically killed the topsoil, that we've messed this up. So talk to us. A lot of people always called it, when I was a child, the bedwetting weed.
Yes. That's because there's a French name for it, and it says exactly that. And again, a lot of names and a lot of stories tell us a lot about actually the truth of the plant. And of course, yes, they used to say, you touch a dandelion, you'll wet the bed. Well, that's because it does have diuretic properties. So it does help us to clear through the kidneys. And that's predominantly the leaf. So the aerial part, the leaf and the flowers, are more to do with the diuretics, so that they help us with our flow through the bladder and the kidney, and they help us to support that area as well, the urinary tract, basically. Now, the root is quite different. And of course, the aerial parts are what you would take in the summertime, the spring and the summertime, especially those beautiful new young leaves when they appear. Those are our true spring greens, absolutely wonderful. And we can eat them and we can drink them. We can have them raw, we can cook with them, we can do anything that we want. And we can collect the flower heads. And we can not only brew them, but we can eat them. And if you lived in France, you would have been taught that, and you would still be doing it in France and Italy, as they still do, because they are part of everyday salad. They're just normal. In this country, it's becoming trendy now. But in actual fact, it's only simply because that knowledge stopped being handed down, and people would see them as you said, as something else, and something to be destroyed and got rid of, eradicated, which is absolutely bonkers. Because in actual fact, dandelions can save your life. The root in particular has a slightly different action within the body. The root is more connected with the liver, the gallbladder, and the digestive tract, and the bowel. So it's mildly laxative in the root. And we mainly harvest the root in the autumn, winter time, when the aerial parts are resting and the strength and the energy is then in the root. And that's when we would harvest and we would lift and we would be using them. And as you said, they've got long tap roots, so they really work the ground, and they're wonderful to use. And again, coming back to war times, when you couldn't get coffee, when it was unavailable, then people used to roast the dandelion root just lightly, dry it out a little bit, which smells fabulous. If you've done it, you'll know it smells a bit like chocolate.
I do it all the time.
Yes, fools everybody. They think you're baking a cake, when in actual fact you've got dandelion roots going through the oven. And of course, they used to blend them, of course, with chicory as well. So, you'd get that same context, that they're both very bitter. You've got the bitter element, and bitter is the lifesaver for us humans. It's something that's absolutely essential, because it ensures that we get better function in the liver and the gallbladder. So the digestive tract is always healthier if we consume bitter foods.
I think that's really important, because a lot of people think bitter is nasty and so they don't eat it. And the thing is that your gut biome changes as you eat. And it changes, it only takes about 15 days, I believe, to change the gut biome. In Passover, it is, in the Jewish festival of Passover, they always have bitter herbs. That's the greenery on the plate, because the bitterness of herbs is a lifesaver to our body.
Totally. And we're hearing more about that now because people are talking about the microbiome. But you know, Hippocrates said centuries ago, all disease starts in the gut. We didn't have the names that we've now got, but we herbalists have always worked with the gut first. We don't just give people herbs. We look at how they are functioning. And that's another modern term that's come in, functional medicine, functional doctors, all come from America. But in actual fact, we've been doing it for centuries. We look at how we function. So this holistic way of working is the whole person, not separate bits of people, mind and body. Look at a knee, look at an elbow. No, you look at the whole person. And that's how herbalists have always worked and continue to work. So we don't look at just bits, and we certainly always look at what's going on in the gut, because there's lots of symptoms and signs that tell us all sorts, even facial reading, what's going on with the eyes. Like doctors used to look at your eyes, they used to look at your tongue, used to feel your pulse, and not just to read numbers. And we herbalists still do that. We are trained in diagnostics. So we don't need necessarily to tap into machinery and charge people a lot of money to tap into machinery. Now, don't get me wrong, some people like to do that and choose to do that, but many of us that are very traditional are taught in the traditional ways of our diagnostics, and we use that. We can tell with the temperature, we can tell with the color, we can tell with all sorts of things. So we read people and we listen to the symptoms that they say that they've got. But in actual fact, we are not labeling in the same way as the allopathic doctors or orthodox medicine. We work in a completely different way, and we start with what's going on with the function, and also what's happening here in the brain and the mind.
Yeah, I'm a tapper, so you know, you have to deal with what's happening in the mind. But the fact that Western medicine, allopathic medicine now only looks, there's a specialist for every single part of the body. And you know, I think my audience all know my story. You know, when I was incredibly ill, spent 2 years of my life in my bed, and then found the tumor in my throat, and I ended up seeing 4 consultants, and I kept asking if it was connected, and they are not taught to connect the body.
No, they're not.
And everything is connected, and it's not just connected within our body, it's connected to our environment, as you said, our mind. And I'm going to come back to what we were talking about earlier, which was also the planets. So let's have a little deeper dive into this one.
Why not? I love it. Yes. Okay, I was brought up with an understanding about, to a degree, on astrology and things of that sort. So it's always been a lifelong interest anyway. But when I started to study with my formal training, which actually took me 6 years, I was fascinated to find there were so many connections with astrology. And I've kept that fascination and that interest. And there's a number of really good herbalists working in this country who are very astrology based. So some of us will look at when you were born, time you were born, month you were born, etc., things like that. Even the day that you come in for the consultation or make the first point of contact, it's all relevant to some of us.
That is fascinating. So what happens with the planetary aspect? Are there times of the year or the moon that you harvest? Is it connected in that link?
There's all that as well. There's so much to talk about. This is a whole podcast in itself, really. Yes, because like biodynamic gardening and planting by the moon, harvesting by the moon, some people are very keen to do that as gardeners, but also as herbalists. And there's like certain times of the day where you know that the properties of certain herbs would be better too. So the planetary influences, all of them, can't be ignored. And in reality, when people say, oh, it's nonsense, it doesn't exist, how can you deny that the moon alone doesn't affect our oceans and the cycles of all sorts of things? Women with the blood loss and all sorts of things, the menses. The oceans are a huge player in what's going on, high tides, storm surges, all sorts of things. So, even your Wi-Fi cuts out when storms and all sorts of things. So you can't ignore the fact that we, like our plants, which we are basically kin, they are our family, they are our cousins. Everything is related on this planet, and we're all involved in the same processes of everything else that goes on this planet. We're all affected in the same sorts of way. So just like the summer and the winter, if you take the two extremes of the weather conditions, they have a huge effect on us, as we know, but also they do on all our planets and all living things on the earth. So it's not just one thing, is it? It's everything.
It's never one thing. Everything is connected.
It's all connected. And I find it incredible that people can't put that together. Do you remember the song when we were children, the knee bones connected to and that little song, one thing and another? Yeah, well, they don't even think about that now in a lot of places when you go for medical treatment. No, you're just a separate bit. Let's just look at that. You need 20 people in, 30 people in if you wanted to look at maybe, just one leg, because they've all got, all specialists, different bits. That's not how a herbalist works in any country across the world. There's not just Western herbalists. There's all sorts of different herbalists. There's all different cultures, have all got their own herbal knowledge and information, but none of them work in the way that allopathic medicine does.
So that's very, very true. So if there were 10 herbs that you could not live without, that you think that everybody should have in their toolkit, in their home, in some form or another. I know that's a really tough one. What would those 10 be?
Well, I was brought up with comfrey. So comfrey is something that I use lots and lots of, both as a gardener. I do have an allotment and I do grow food as well as medicine, all sorts of things. But comfrey is a feed, of course, for plants. And I see it as a feed for us as well. So feed the soil, not necessarily the plants, is how we do it. So having comfrey in your compost bin, making feed from it, using it in the dispensary. I make lots of ointment with it for external use, but we do use the leaf internally. Governments didn't want us when we were in the EU to use the roots anymore. In fact, they took them off the shelves and said to registered herbalists, you can't use the root of comfrey anymore. And that was because some people damaged their livers and became very ill. And that's because self-diagnosing, self-treating. It's a dangerous thing to do sometimes with certain herbs. Just because the herbs doesn't mean they're all absolutely safe and you can just go at it and, everything will be all right. You've really got to get some knowledge and know what you're doing and get your knowledge from the right place.
Yeah, they are incredibly powerful, and you cannot underestimate the power of these herbs. And so you do need guidance to do this. Comfrey is a favorite one of mine as well for the garden. I remember the first time I tried to buy it to make my garden feed. I went to the garden centre and they went, we're not selling comfrey, it's a bloody weed, it will take over your garden. I'm going,
how rude.
Yeah, it's a really good one, actually. So I still make a nettle feed for my garden as well. Stinging nettles makes a very good feed, but it's not quite as good as the comfrey, I don't think. Would you agree?
Well, one's potassium and one's nitrogen in the main. So one's producing flowers and fruit and things, and the other's helping with leaf and things like that. So they're quite different. But nettle's another one I wouldn't like to be without. That's one of my top 10, I suppose, as well, because I use the whole plant fresh out of the ground. In the springtime, it's the spring green, right up to just before it starts to come into flower. It's all about collecting the leaves and using the leaves. And it's food and medicine. I mean, what's all this about? Spinach, far superior to be eating nettles. Nettles clear deposits in the body. Spinach lays down deposits in the body. So if you've got arthritis and inflammatory problems such as that, then really spinach is not the thing you should be consuming, but nettles certainly are. They help to clear and to get rid. And again, they work through the urinary tract. So people like me are harvesting leaves, using them as food and medicine. And then when they come into seed, we'll use the seed as an adaptogen to help with energy, especially in the morning and for people with like chronic fatigue, all sorts of other things. But then the root in the wintertime, like collecting dandelion root, when the top growth has gone down, the aerial part, we're then collecting the roots. And those wonderful yellow roots are just great for men with prostate problems. keep it healthy, the everything about it. So the whole plant is used. And of course, throughout the year, it's a haven, a habitat for all wildlife. So patches of it are left for the caterpillars, for the moths, for the butterflies. I think we've 8 native butterflies that can't live without the nettle.
Surprisingly, I have a lot of nettles in my garden because it is my number one herb. Absolutely.
I'm not surprised. It needs to be up there. It's absolutely super. Yeah.
I have it every day. And I actually got taken down off TikTok and lost 44,000 followers for talking about the health benefits of nettles.
Isn't it crazy? It's just bonkers, that, isn't it, really?
As misinformation.
They've been used for centuries, absolute centuries, and around the world. And of course, nettles show that that's where humans have been as well. There's parts of the planet where they don't appear, but certainly in the UK, it's where humans have been. And again, they're generous, plentiful.
Very generous.
But again, we need to know that we only use them to eat and for medicine up to the point of just coming into flower. And a lot of people, a lot of misinformation out there is, and a lot of things that go on all these sites and things, never be harvesting them when they're in flower. You've got to leave them for wildlife, and you've got to wait for them to set the seed. And then if you want to harvest seed, that's absolutely fine, but don't be using them as food and medicine. And how many people actually know that in the UK? They think you can be picking at nettles all year round and using them all the time, and it might be causing problems.
That's a really good point. And I want to come to you about the seeds, because I only have half a thyroid, so I have nettle seeds to give me energy instead of well, I won't name the medicine that I'm meant to be on, but I'm not, and I find that nettle seeds do me just fine. So you harvest the female seeds. Can you talk us through the difference? Because when I started learning this, I found this incredibly hard, and I was watching, loads of YouTube videos on the male and the female seeds. So
difficult. Well, without a picture, it's a bit tricky. So this is why on Instagram, the Herb Society, I do little videos and I do pictures and things of that sort. Because without a picture, it's hard to actually show it. Great if you're doing a herb walk or an event and you can actually show people. Basically, it's the ones that look like the old-fashioned tricorn hat, like a triangle that they used to wear on the hat. So you want the thick seeds, the really bulky ones. You don't want the thin, spindly ones. That's an easy way to tell the difference between the female and the male. So you want the thick, chunky ones. Those are the ones you really want to use. So when they first start setting the seed, they all look a bit the same. So wait a bit and wait and see what's happening, and then go for the thick, chunky ones.
And the thick, chunky ones look a little bit like a bishop's hat, don't they?
Yes, they do. What I call a tricorn hat. Yeah, they do. Triangular. Yes, definitely. But don't worry about it too much. Just go for the ones that are really quite chunky.
Okay. And the other question that people might have is, won't it sting you harvesting them? Because they're so little, you can't wear gloves. And I have this little technique where I pick a nettle every day when they're out, and I just say, good morning. You're not going to sting me. And they don't.
Yeah.
And if I then go walking, because I'm always walking barefoot in the woods and I'm doing my grounding, and then if I don't see a nettle and I stand on one, I get stung and I go, ow, bloody hell. And I realize that I have not told them, thank you, please don't sting me. But it works. It sounds as mad as shit, but it works, doesn't it, Barbara?
Well, the little hypodermic needles are on the top surface of the leaves. So if you go in with a big hand onto the top of them, there'll be all the hypodermics sticking up. But if you go underneath, that's the trick. You don't need gloves if you go in underneath and you take them from the underneath. But if you go in at the top, ham-fisted, you probably get stung. And that's like you treading on them, because you're going in on the top growth.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're coming underneath, you're safe.
Oh, that's a fantastic tip. I didn't know that. So, I mean, I'm so grateful for that one. I can't tell you. Right. So we've got, what have we got in our tool chest? We comfrey, nettle, dandelion.
Yeah. What else? I'm going for another wild one. One of my other top ones is plantain. And I like both the broadleaf plantain and I like the narrowleaf plantain. So both of them are good. Lancelotta, to give it botanical name, is the long, thin leaf. And then the large one, which is almost heart-shaped and can get enormous if you let it grow on, Both of them contain the same chemical components, so you can use either or. It doesn't matter which you use. So it depends where they're plentiful around you as to where you can actually get them. But they are a natural antihistamine, both of them, a natural antihistamine. Absolutely no need to buy stuff and be taking stuff. If you start early in the season when the nettle comes up out of the ground and the plantains are coming up out of the ground, and you combine the two, then that would be super, because they're both natural antihistamine, nettle and plantain. So put the two together, you get the double whammy. And if you start taking them as they're coming up out of the ground in the spring, as spring greens, as food, drink, anything you want to do, if you take them on a very regular basis, like most days, then that will keep your histamine level in a better balance, and you're less likely to actually get the overblown hay fever problems and other things that happen, the rhinitis and everything else. So it's about being the Girl Guide, the brownie, the cub, whatever you were back in the day. Be prepared. Nature tells you, I'm growing, I'm here for you, I've got your back. Start thinking to be working with me. If you leave it until your symptoms arrive, it might not work. And that's when people go, oh, I tried nettles, I tried plantain, it didn't work. That's because they haven't got into the system. They've not got in the routine. They're just looking for the quick fix, which is what you do with allopathic medicine, is the quick fix. I've got the problem now, sort it now. Often with herbs, it's a smaller, gradual build-up to get the body into a better state of balance and harmony so that the symptoms don't actually occur. So the other thing I love about plantain is if you get bitten or stung by anything, even a nasty horsefly, if you roll up the leaf of the plantain, some people chew it, get saliva involved, doesn't matter which you do, and then you rub it onto the bite or the sting, it stops it tracing through the blood. So it's immediate antihistamine, no itch, no irritation, nothing. Now, everybody in the UK needs to know that.
They do. I didn't know that.
That is so important.
So important. But another good one to actually stop those little blighters getting you in the first place is lemon balm. If you roll up the lemon balm leaves and just rub it over your body,
I would say sometimes that helps, because different things, and there's a lot of flying things and all sorts of things around that can be attracted to us for a whole raft of reasons. And lemon balm for some, yes. Lavender for others. Citronella for others. There's so many. So when people like me make like a bug spray to keep things away, we also use like rose geranium, the pelargonium as well. And now with the increase in problems with ticks and Lyme's disease potential and all sorts of things, then we need to really have more than just one thing in the toolkit, so that we've got several things combined together, so that it doesn't matter what's flying in or coming in your direction, there's a chance that it's not going to like you as much because of what you've got on, what you're actually wearing. So it's important to be preventative. It's very important.
The preventative thing is singly the most important thing, I think. And you get people talking about their hay fever kind of June or whatever, and you go, absolutely Mother Nature knows when to bring this stuff up and show us. But I'm going to come back to the plantain, which is another one of my favorite plants. Now, I want to ask an expert here, because I don't know how to pronounce the name of my next plant I'm going to mention you.
Okay. I warn you, pronunciation's not my best. You're talking to a woman from Oldham originally here who had to learn Latin and didn't as a child.
No, just the English name. So I call it mullein, and my sister calls it mullein.
Yeah, your sister's right, I'm afraid. For many years, I used to do what you do. But if you look at the spelling, it is actually mullein. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, but...
Another one that's quite amusing is calendula. A lot of people call it calendula. We're talking pot marigold here.
Yeah.
That's always another one that's quite funny, because if you break it down as to how it's spelt, you would say calendula, but actually it's calendula.
I'm highly dyslexic, so I think that's why I got mullein. Have I got the right? Mullein.
Yeah, sounds lovely. You're beautiful.
Mullein.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a question now. Which is your favorite for cleaning the lungs? Mullein or total mind block. What we're talking about?
Elecampane, inula, or what else would you go for? I mean, I'm a real fan of elecampane, inula helenium, which is a huge plant that will be coming into flower in the summer, a big daisy flower. And I use the roots, highly fragrant, and it's a tonic to the lungs and the respiratory system. And over the bonkers few years that we all had to live through, we used a lot of our respiratory herbs, and that is a general tonic anyway. But it's one of my top for respiratory. But mullein, yes, I use it. It depends on the individual, to be honest. It depends what else is going on with them and whether they need moistening. If you take a cough, for example, we are trained in a completely different way than the complementary medicine people. We are trained to look at the cause of the cough and whether it's dry, whether it's productive, non-productive. So a cough, you need to ask a lot more questions. You need to find out much more, because a cough is an indicator of an irritation, could be anywhere, could even be with the heart, not the lungs. So you have to really look at the individual. It's this holistic way of looking at people, the whole person with whole plants.
Would you use plantain for the lungs as well?
Yes, potentially would. With lots of plants for the respiratory system, absolutely lots. And plantain is one of them that we would use in the respiratory system. Very good for people who are asthmatic, as with many other respiratory problems. Yeah, it's one of the top ones in there.
Okay, let's hit another really big one for you. Find us another one.
Well, I've so many. I work with over 300 herbs, and a lot of them are herbs that I grow myself. And I've been working just yesterday with St. John's wort, which is one that gets a lot of bad press. A lot of scary things are said about poor old St. John's wort. And in reality, it's a fabulous plant. And most of us use it not in the way that people are now told to use it, as a mild antidepressant, but be careful because of all the pharmaceutical drugs it might interfere and cause problems. That is truthful, because pharmaceuticals do create a lot of problems. So we have to be aware. So again, medical herbalists are trained in all the pharmaceuticals to understand the interactions and the contraindications. So we have to know what we can give individuals. That's why part of your consultation is all to do with, well, what are you using? Not only supplements, not only your food and your drink, but also all the pharmaceuticals. What are you on, over counter and all the rest of it?
I didn't know you trained in that, actually. So I find that fascinating.
We have to know. Because you can't just give people medicines. So we have to know. This is the difference in a registered medical herbalist and somebody that calls themselves a herbalist, who is often untrained. They might be wonderful. They might be, as my mother and grandfather were, knowledge that's handed down in history, you know, and families. But you might not have the modern day information. And, you know, I see people come in with a carrier bag of maybe 20, 30 drugs on first appointment. And it's like, they don't even know what they're taking them for half the time.
And also the fact that everything has a side effect. So you've got this kind of complete and utter knock on. But, you know, there is an element of that with herbs as well. As I said, they're incredibly powerful.
Polyfarming, it's still polyfarming. It doesn't matter whether it's a pharmaceutical or a herb. So you have to know what you're doing. You can't just mix all sorts of things together and give it same size fits all. You've got to treat the individual and know what's right for the. For example, some people have very loose bowels, other people are very constipated. So you've got to balance your herbs to ensure that, you know, you're not creating problems there, or you're helping to ease things there.
I have to admit, I self-prescribe. I'm not a trained herbalist, but I always listen to my body. And, you know, I've got my water here and I've got a little bit of mint in there, and I've got some fennel, and I've got, oh, what else have I got in there? There's a stinging nettle leaf in there. And I'm happy with that. You know, there's always
Absolutely.
a dandelion. I do have dandelion and stinging nettle every single day of my life, but in small quantities. And I always have this rule of thumb that when I do my herbal teapot in the morning, I put the herbs in, but I don't add any more herbs that day. I just keep topping up the water. And then some days I might kind of go, okay, I don't need the hawthorn today. I don't need the rosehip today. But I listen to my body, and my body tells me what I need.
It's called working with your instincts and your intuition. And that's what we all used to do. And as children, we did that second nature. And somehow we grew up and we forget all these things, and we have to be reminded, and we have to remember who we are. And that's how we should work all the time. What do we feel like today? What don't we feel like? And that's what we call having garden tea. Go out and choose and pick what you want with how you feel. So you're working with your instincts and your intuition. It's the best way. It's definitely the best way. I would say if you've a chronic condition or a long-term condition that's been going on, or several symptoms, you need to see somebody that's registered. It's very difficult. You can waste time and money by trying to self-diagnose and self-treat.
Yeah, I'm just doing maintenance, so I'm kind of happy with my maintenance.
That's a way of life. That's a way of life, and that's how it should be. That's exactly what's needed.
We are running out of time, but I do want to know about St. John's wort, because everybody does think of it as a mild antidepressant. So
we mainly use it for pain relief. It's a huge pain reliever, especially if you've got nerve damage. So say you've had an operation and you've got nerve damage and you're not recovering, then St. John's wort is absolutely vital. Say you've had shingles or chickenpox and you've got those nerve problems that are running on the nerves. It's the herb that we would use, not only to take the pain down, but also to sort out the damage that's going on and the virus that's going on. So it's antiviral as well as pain relief. Much more that would be much more how somebody like me would use it, rather than as a mild antidepressant, with much more herbs in our toolkit that we would go for. And it would always depend on the individual as to what we would choose.
And what medications they're on.
Yes, absolutely. And what they're eating and drinking, which they don't realize that a lot of the cause of the problems are back to that microbiome, and maybe constantly being triggered by what they're eating. What they're putting in every day is maybe triggering the symptoms all the time.
That is so true. We are running close to the end of the podcast, and I want you to tell everybody how they can support the Herb Society. And I want to say to all you lovely people out there, this is a charity predominantly run by wonderful volunteers like Barbara. And if we want this knowledge and this powerful knowledge to continue for the next generations, I would absolutely implore you to come and join the Herb Society now. Barbara, where can we find you? What can we do to help?
Well, the good news is we do have a website. It's constantly needing updating, like they do, and help with the website. But we do have a website, the Herb Society UK, and we have part-time support staff and just a few volunteers. We look for the members to be inclusive with us, to be part of the whole organisation, so they can write in the magazines and the newsletters and get involved with the blog. They can do book reviews. So becoming a member brings you into a community, and it's about the community that are interested in herbs, nature and environment. And it's very, very important in this day and age that we don't dumb down what we've used for centuries, and we don't lose our cultural heritage, and that we go forward knowing what the past was, what's the present, and what potentially will be in the future. And herbs need to be in our present and our future. We've got the history, we've got the knowledge, we've got the information. And in the Herb Society, we have archives. We have back copies for you to read, and all sorts of wealth of knowledge and information that is free to members to access and to use, to write their books, to do their own research. And of course, it brings people together. So you can live anywhere, abroad even, not just in the UK. We have many overseas visitors as well. We have digital magazines and, you know, with ways of contacting people. And we've started to do some online events. But we can't do everything for free because we are a charity that has no outside funding. We don't apply for it and we don't have any. So we are reliant on continually getting membership, maybe if people leave a donation or a legacy, and maybe if they do some advertising with us. But none of our rates are expensive as a charity, because we're all about education and keeping the knowledge alive.
That's fantastic to hear, because so many people want to learn this now. There has never been a more important moment in history that we have to learn what our ancestors knew and what has been dumbed down and suppressed for many generations. And they've done this through witch hunts all over the years. You know, the power of this is mind-blowing, and we need to pass it on. We need to give it to our children and our grandchildren, because without this knowledge, this planet will not survive, I don't believe. And so I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to you, Barbara Wilkinson, from the Herb Society UK. This has been a joy. Barbara and I are going to have a little chat now on my locals channel. So if you want to come and subscribe over there, then we'd love to see you. But for today on The Wellness Way, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.